All right, so let's jump right into it. Prologis just had their Q4 2024 earnings call, and there's a lot to unpack.
Absolutely. Tons to dig into.
I mean, Prologis is the world's biggest owner of warehouse space, so their numbers tell us a lot about the state of the global economy.
Not just the economy.
Right.
Supply chains, too.
Yeah.
And the real estate market, of course.
Exactly. Lots of moving pieces.
So let's break it all down.
Perfect. So first, the headline numbers. Prologis closed the year with record lease signings and an impressive 8.4% growth in core FFO.
Yeah, that's funds from operations, by the way.
Right, a key metric for REITs.
Like Prologis.
But, like always, there's more to the story than just those top-line figures.
Oh, yeah, for
So
sure.
let's dig a little deeper.
Okay, so one fascinating thing here is Prologis signed a record 60 million square feet of leases in Q4.
That sounds like a huge quarter.
It was, but there's a catch.
Oh,
Most of that activity happened in just a few weeks after the election.
wow, so things were pretty slow for most of the quarter.
Relatively, yeah.
And then the election happens.
And bam, everyone's rushing to sign leases.
What do you think caused that?
Seems like a classic case of wait and see.
Makes sense.
Businesses were holding back on big decisions.
Because of the election.
Oh, the uncertainty, yeah.
It's wild how much political events can affect something like warehouse leasing.
Right.
It's a good reminder for investors, for sure.
Definitely.
Now, shifting gears a bit to the global picture, Prologis' international markets actually did better than the U.S. market in Q4.
They did.
Tell me more about that.
Well, Japan was strong.
Okay.
So was Europe
Uh-huh.
and Latin America.
So basically everywhere but the U.S.
Pretty much. It
That's
shows you
reasonable.
the global reach of their business
For sure.
and how economies are recovering differently around the world.
It's like Prologis is giving us a global economic snapshot.
In a way, yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Definitely an interesting perspective.
Now let's switch gears to something a little more serious. The wildfires in Southern California,
Right.
devastating stuff.
Absolutely.
And Prologis has a lot of property in those areas, right?
They do.
So what's their plan?
Well, right now, their focus is on supporting their employees,
Of course.
their customers,
Yeah,
and the whole community, really.
that's good to hear.
Yeah, but these wildfires also raise some long-term questions.
About?
The impact on the regional economy
Sure.
and the real estate market, of course.
Right. It's a reminder that even a giant like Prologis can be affected by local events,
Especially unpredictable ones.
like natural disasters. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's talk about Prologis making a big bet on data centers.
Okay, yeah.
They seem really bullish on this sector.
They are. They're projecting 10 gigawatts of development potential over the next decade.
Wow, 10 gigawatts. That's a lot.
It is.
So they're not just talking the talk. They're putting their money where their mouth is.
They are.
They recently sold a converted logistics facility in Chicago for a big profit.
They did, which shows they're already active in the data center space.
It's a smart move, diversifying their portfolio,
Definitely.
especially with data storage and processing demand exploding.
Absolutely. It's a huge growth area.
Now let's look at rent trends. Overall market rents dipped a little in Q4,
They did, slightly.
but Prologis is predicting a turnaround later in 2025.
That's their forecast, yeah.
Why are they so optimistic?
Well, they say vacancy rates are declining,
Okay.
and there's strong demand from some key segments,
Right.
e-commerce
Of course.
and third-party logistics providers.
Those 3PLs, right?
Exactly.
So they're betting on those strong market fundamentals to overcome any short-term issues.
That's the idea.
It's a bit of a gamble, though, right?
So there's always some uncertainty.
Especially in today's crazy world.
Yeah, for sure.
Prologis management even admitted there are challenges ahead,
They did.
but they're still bullish on the long term.
Long term, yeah.
It's a balancing act for sure.
It is.
Okay, I think that's a good place to wrap up this first look at Prologis.
Sounds good.
What are your big takeaways so far?
Well, Prologis is definitely navigating a complex and changing world.
For sure.
Global economic uncertainty,
Yeah.
rising interest rates,
Yes.
even natural disasters.
Right.
But at the same time, they're taking advantage of opportunities in data centers, e-commerce, and other growing areas.
It's a fascinating snapshot of how a company at the top of its game adapts to all these challenges.
Definitely.
And for investors, Prologis's performance gives us valuable insights into the global industrial real estate market.
Absolutely.
And their forecasts give us some clues about where the market might be headed.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's the deep dive into Prologis's earnings call so far.
Yep.
But before we move on,
Okay.
it's time for our favorite segment.
Oh, I love this part.
This is not financial advice.
The disclaimer is key.
Always.
All right, hit me with it.
What if we short Tesla
Okay.
and go long on Prologis?
Short Tesla, long Prologis. Interesting.
Hear me out.
Okay, I'm listening.
Tesla's future is, well, a little uncertain right now.
That's fair.
But Prologis is in a prime position to profit from the growth of e-commerce
Uh-huh.
and data centers,
Yeah.
regardless of who's making the cars.
Okay, I see your logic.
Just a thought.
Bold, but hey, you never know.
Full disclaimer, though.
Yes, very important.
We are not qualified financial advisors.
Not even close.
This is purely for entertainment purposes.
Just for fun.
Do not actually do this.
Seriously, folks, don't base your investment decisions on our crazy ideas.
All right, that's all for part 1 of our Prologis deep dive.
Can't wait to see what else we uncover. Okay, so moving on. I think one of the most interesting things that jumped out at me in Prologis' report was their lease mark-to-market.
Yeah, that was a big number.
It's currently at a whopping 30%.
30%. Wow, that's huge.
It is.
But for those of us who aren't real estate experts, can you break that down a bit? What does a 30% mark-to-market actually mean?
Sure, so think about it like this. Let's say you rented out your house 5 years ago, and you haven't raised the rent since then.
Okay, I'm following.
Now imagine what you could charge for that same house if you put it on the market today.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
You could probably get a lot more, right?
Definitely. The market's changed a lot in 5 years.
Exactly. And that difference, that potential for higher rent, is what mark-to-market is all about.
Ah, that's a great analogy.
So in Prologis' case, if all their leases expired today
Okay.
and they renewed them at current market rates,
Right.
their net operating income would jump by a whopping 30%.
So that's a massive potential upside for them.
It is. It shows how strong their portfolio really is.
And that they locked in those leases at below market rates.
Exactly. It's a huge driver of future growth.
Speaking of future growth, let's talk about their development pipeline. They've got $4.7 billion worth of projects in the works.
Yeah, they're not slowing down.
And those projects are expected to generate $1.1 billion in value.
It's impressive.
That's a lot of construction going on.
It is, and it just highlights the continued growth we're seeing in e-commerce and global supply chains.
Which drives the demand for more warehouse space.
Exactly.
And speaking of demand, Prologis mentioned they're seeing a lot of activity from their largest global customers.
They are.
You know, those Fortune 500 companies.
The big players.
Exactly. And that's a good sign. Right.
It is. Those companies have the resources to make big investments.
And they're clearly confident enough in the economy to do so.
Exactly. It suggests a broader uptick in business confidence.
Prologis also talked about a surge in leasing from 3PLs.
Yeah, third-party logistics providers.
Right. You explained what they do earlier.
They handle warehousing, transportation, basically all of the logistics for their clients.
So why are they so important for Prologis?
Well, global supply chains are getting more complex.
Makes sense.
More companies are outsourcing their logistics to these 3PLs.
Okay.
And that, of course, drives demand for warehouse space.
And Prologis is there to provide it.
Exactly. They're in the perfect position to capture that demand.
All right. So we've painted a pretty rosy picture so far.
It has.
But let's address the elephant in the room.
Okay.
Interest rates.
Right.
They've been going up.
They have.
And that's got to be a concern for a real estate company like Prologis, right?
Definitely. Higher interest rates mean higher borrowing costs.
Which makes new development projects more expensive.
Exactly.
And can hurt their profit margins.
Exactly.
So how are they dealing with this?
Well, they're not just sitting around waiting for rates to come down.
Good.
They're taking a multi-pronged approach.
Okay.
First, they've got a really strong balance sheet.
So they're not as vulnerable as some other companies might be.
Right. And they have access to capital at competitive rates.
Okay, that makes sense.
And second, they're being super disciplined with their development. They're focusing on the best locations.
Prime real estate.
Exactly. And they're only starting projects that meet their return criteria.
So they're not chasing growth for the sake of growth.
No, they're being strategic.
Smart.
Yeah, they're not just throwing money at every opportunity that comes along.
Okay, that's reassuring.
This should be.
Now, this next thing really caught my attention. Prologis is making a push into solar energy.
They are.
They're aiming to hit 1 gigawatt of solar generation and storage by the end of 2025.
Ambitious goal.
It is. That seems like a lot for a warehouse company.
It is ambitious, but it's a smart move.
How so?
Well, first off, it's a big commitment to sustainability.
Which is good for the planet?
Exactly.
and also good for business.
Right. Investors and tenants care about this stuff.
More and more these days.
Definitely.
And on a practical level, it helps Prologis control their energy costs.
Makes them less vulnerable to price swings.
Right. It's a win-win situation.
Absolutely.
Speaking of wins, Prologis highlighted some strong performance in several international markets.
They did.
Japan, the UK, Southern Europe, Latin America. They're all over the map. It's interesting to see how those regions are performing.
It's like a global economic snapshot, you know?
Yeah, and it shows how those different areas are recovering.
Exactly. And which sectors are driving that growth.
So investors should pay attention to Prologis's global performance.
Definitely. It can be a valuable way to spot emerging trends and opportunities.
All right, so we've talked about a lot of positive things,
We have.
but let's be realistic. Prologis is operating in a very complex global environment.
All right. There are challenges out there.
Challenges. There are tons of challenges.
There sure are geopolitical tensions,
Yep.
inflation, supply chain disruptions.
It's a lot to deal with.
It is. And Prologis acknowledges those challenges.
They do.
But they also emphasize their ability to adapt.
That's good.
They've got a strong balance sheet, a diversified portfolio, and a history of navigating these kinds of cycles.
So they're built to weather the storm.
Exactly. They're not some fly-by-night operation.
Now, there's one area that Prologis didn't really address in this call.
Hmm.
And it's something I'm really curious about.
What's that?
The potential impact of artificial intelligence on their business.
That's a big one.
It is. AI is changing everything.
Absolutely. It's transforming industries left and right.
And logistics is ripe for disruption.
No doubt.
So what do you think? Will we see robots running warehouses in the future?
It's definitely possible.
It's a little scary, to be honest.
Well, it could mean fewer jobs for humans.
Right? But it could also make warehouses way more efficient.
True. And Prologis could be a leader in this transition.
They could use AI to their advantage.
Exactly. Optimize operations, improve forecasting.
Yeah. Who knows what the future holds?
Exactly. It's a whole new world.
But it's definitely something investors should be thinking about.
Absolutely. It's a game changer.
All right, let's move on to something a little less futuristic.
Okay.
Prologis's capital recycling strategy.
Right. That sounds a bit complicated.
It does, but it's actually pretty straightforward.
Okay. Break it down for me.
It's basically buying and selling assets strategically to maximize their returns.
So like trading stocks, but with real estate.
Kind of, yeah. In Q4, they contributed $2 billion worth of assets to their strategic capital ventures
Okay.
and sold off over $900 million worth of properties.
So they're constantly fine-tuning their portfolio.
Exactly. Getting rid of underperforming assets and reinvesting in areas with higher growth potential.
Smart.
It is. It's like pruning a tree to make it grow stronger.
I like that analogy.
It's all about disciplined capital allocation.
Which has been a big part of their success.
Absolutely.
Now, even with interest rates rising, Prologis still managed to raise a good chunk of capital for their various investment vehicles.
That's impressive.
It is. Shows that investors have confidence in their management team.
And their track record.
Exactly. They've proven themselves over time.
So they've got the financial resources to keep growing.
They do, whether it's through acquisitions or developing new properties.
Speaking of development, Prologis gave us a little peek at their 2025 plans.
Okay, what are they thinking?
Their forecasting starts between $2.25 billion and $2.75 billion.
That's still a healthy pipeline.
It is, but it's also a little below their historical average.
So are they being more cautious?
I think so. They're being very selective about the projects they're taking on.
Makes sense given the uncertain economic outlook.
Exactly. They're not just throwing money at everything.
But they did emphasize their flexibility.
Right. If the market improves, they can ramp up development quickly.
They're ready to pounce if the right opportunity comes along.
Now, one thing Prologis didn't give us much detail on was their capital raising plans for 2025.
True, that was a bit vague.
But they sounded confident in their ability to attract capital.
Well, they've got a great track record.
And a compelling story to tell.
Exactly, so I wouldn't be surprised if they exceed expectations.
Especially if interest rates stabilize.
And investors start looking for good opportunities in real estate again.
Right. There's always a lot of money looking for a home. Now, I want to touch on something Prologis emphasized throughout their call.
Okay, what's that?
The importance of their data and analytics.
Oh, yes, their secret weapon.
It is a bit like a secret weapon. They've got this sophisticated data platform that gives them incredible insight into the market.
So they can see what's coming before anyone else.
In a way, yeah. They can see trends, customer behavior, supply chain dynamics.
It helps them make better decisions.
Absolutely. About acquisitions, development, leasing, everything.
It's a huge competitive advantage.
It is. It's like having a crystal ball.
Exactly.
Prologis isn't just a real estate company anymore.
What are they then?
They're a tech company.
Disguised as a real estate company.
Exactly.
It's fascinating to see how data is changing everything.
It really is.
Now, remember that inflection point in rent growth we talked about earlier?
Yeah, Prologis seems pretty confident it's coming
They do. They think rents will bottom out later in 2025.
and then start climbing again.
Right. But they admit it's hard to predict exactly when that will happen.
Of course, there are a lot of factors at play.
But there are a couple of things that could really speed up rent growth.
Like what?
Well, first, there's this trend of onshoring and nearshoring,
Right, that's where companies are bringing their manufacturing back to the U.S.
or to nearby countries like Mexico.
It's been a big topic lately.
It has, and for good reason.
Why?
Well, if that trend continues, it's going to increase demand for warehouse space.
Especially in strategic locations.
Exactly.
And that could push rents higher.
Right, simple supply and demand.
And Prologis would be in a prime position to benefit.
They would, with their huge network of warehouses across North America.
Makes sense.
Another factor to watch is the growth of e-commerce.
That's not slowing down anytime soon.
Not at all, and e-commerce companies need a ton of warehouse space.
For storage, for fulfillment, for everything.
Exactly, and Prologis is already a major player in that space.
They've got those deep relationships with all the big online retailers.
They do, and they're building new properties specifically for e-commerce companies.
So they're thinking ahead.
Absolutely. They're well positioned for the future of e-commerce.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have Prologis is a fascinating company.
They are. They're a leader in their industry,
And they're not afraid to innovate and adapt.
which is essential in today's rapidly changing world.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, they seem to be firing on all cylinders.
They really are. I mean, they've got the scale,
Mm-hmm.
the expertise,
Definitely.
and the vision to stay on top.
I think so, yeah. I think they're going to continue leading the industrial real estate market for a while.
But they're not getting complacent.
No, not at all.
They're pushing the boundaries,
Exploring new technologies.
adapting to all the changes happening in the world.
And they're really committed to sustainability, which is huge these days.
It is. Both investors and tenants
Mhm.
care about that more and more.
Absolutely.
So yeah, overall, I think Prologis is in a great position.
I agree. I think their future looks very bright.
It does. They're definitely a company worth watching.
Agreed.
Now, before we wrap up, one last thought for our listeners.
Okay.
Prologis didn't talk specifically about how AI might impact their business.
True. They didn't get into specifics on that.
But it's a trend that's already transforming logistics.
It is. AI could completely change how warehouses operate.
Imagine robots handling everything.
Inventory management,
Order fulfillment.
the whole 9 yards.
That's something investors should be thinking about as they look at Prologis.
And all its competitors, too, really.
Exactly. Even the most successful companies need to adapt to these new technologies.
They do. Or they risk getting left behind.
Well said. All right, that wraps up our deep dive into Prologis' earnings call.
It was a good one.
It was a fascinating look at a company that's really leading the way.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Always a pleasure.
And be sure to tune in next time for another insightful episode of The Deep Dive.